So, hi, good day all. Let me share the screen with you all. So, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BCLA Recruitment Professional Development Committee. We present part 2, the Temporary Expanded Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Kyra Han has been gracious enough to come back and do a part 2, and we are really, really happy about that. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time for part 2, don't worry, part 1 materials will be made available. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you can type in the chat box, just feel free to introduce yourself, where you're located, and kind of what you would like to get out of this webinar. All of the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Feel free to add any questions to the chat box at any time. I will be collecting them. And questions can be sent to the email listed there. I will copy and paste it into the chat box, and this is being broadcast live, and the recording is also going to be made available immediately after this if everything goes well. And so with that, I am going to let Kyra take over.
Good morning. Give me just a moment to share my screen and bring up my slides.
And don't forget to share in the chat box if you can, if you feel free, and if you don't feel comfortable, feel free to send the question to me, myself, and I will post it on your behalf. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? You should be seeing a screen that says Public Service Loan Forgiveness Programs. Can Uncle Sam deliver? Part 2, Temporary Expanded Public Service Loan Forgiveness. Good morning. My name is Kyra Han. I'm a librarian with Multnomah County Libraries in Portland, Oregon. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a labor of love, and in case you missed part 1, don't worry. We will share part 1 of last week's webinar with you, and we're going to do a recap as well from some highlights from part 1 as we launch into part 2. So today we're going to be talking about temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness and how that program was created. We're going to do a brief recap of the regular public service loan forgiveness program. We're going to learn how you can apply for temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. And lastly, because there have been so many questions or a point of concern for all of us is some of the temporary student loan measures being considered as related to our new reality of COVID-19. So let's jump into some highlights from part 1 of the webinar, where we focused on public service loan forgiveness. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, it is a program that basically says if you work in public service for 10 years and you make payments on a qualifying repayment plan, you may be eligible for having the balance of your loans forgiven at the end of a 10-year period. In last week's webinar, I really took some time to highlight how student loan debt impacts students by both race and gender, and I just wanted to review a couple of those. Student loans have grown into a significant issue or point of concern to the point that it's now a topic for our political candidates as part of their current campaigns. Um, some of the highlights from last week's webinar were that students of color often take loans at higher rates. Um, we also experience loan delinquency and default, which means you're beyond late on the loan at higher rates. Another takeaway as well is the current system also highlights gender disparities as well. So student loan debt is currently estimated at somewhere in the ballpark of $1.6 trillion. Well, women hold 2/3 of all of that student loan debt. I think the figure from research that's emerging is somewhere around 890 million. I did a quick calculation to figure out what the percentage would be. And basically, women, regardless of your racial background, hold 52% of all student loan debt. Um, Another thing that we saw was Black women hold the highest educational debt amounts, and yet we earn the lowest incomes. Um, so just to give you an idea of how much debt we carry even as undergrads, one of the slides in part one highlighted that, and it was from Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that African Americans, 90% of undergraduates that are African American graduate with student loan debt. For Latinos, the next largest impacted group by student loan debt, just from undergrad, they usually graduate, 72% of Latino graduates carry student loan debt. And for Asian American borrowers, that figure is 51%. And that's just for the undergraduate degree. It then expands as you do more schooling. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is on the right-hand side of the slide. I did include links to resources that will allow you to check student loan debt in your area on both a state level and a local level. They're highly interactive maps. And in part one, we actually showed examples of how interactive they were. But literally, you could take time and tinker with those on your own to put in your local zip code, at least for the mappingstudentdebt.org mapping, because that actually combines, it's a highly interactive map, and it combines older American Community Survey census data with Experian credit reporting. And so it actually allows you to put in like the zip code you live or the zip code that maybe your school is in and get an idea of how many people were impacted by student loan debt. Those are some pretty powerful tools. And I shared them with you as well if you need to make the case in talking to administration for why sharing information about public service loan forgiveness programs matters. The next thing that I want to highlight is the necessary forms that you need for public service loan forgiveness. The first one is the income-driven repayment plan request. And in light of our new situation, for people that are losing income, this may be a viable tool for you as well. You don't have to be participating in public service loan forgiveness in order to apply for an income-driven repayment plan. However, many borrowers who are participating in public service loan forgiveness are also participating in income-driven repayment plans. So I've given you a link to a paper form. You can also apply online on Federal Student Aid's website to get onto an income-driven repayment plan. Once you get onto an income-driven repayment plan, you do have to submit income information every year, and based on your income, they will recalculate what your payment is. They do use household income to calculate what your payments are. The next form that you'll need is an employment certification form. For that form there, basically that's a form that you're going to take to your employer, and they're going to sign off and verify how long you've been employed with that organization. Um, Again, I just want to remind people that this is something that you need to submit annually. Um, and since the program started in 2007, if you haven't submitted these forms before, I encourage you to have employment certification forms for all of the employers that you've had from 2007 to present. But generally, once you submit them for your past employers, you'll just need to submit a new one annually each year for your current employer. You won't have to do the previous employers once you've secured theirs. The third form, which is the last and final form that you need, is called the application for forgiveness. This form we're going to talk about a little bit more today, because this is the form that you're going to submit when you're ready for final forgiveness, or you think you may be eligible for final forgiveness. And another thing that I'd like to highlight from the past webinar is the actual rollout of the program and the tools needed for this program. I think once I go through this, it will help to shed some light on why it has been a challenge for people to qualify for participating in this program. So the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was created through congressional legislation back in 2007. Notice that the next requirement, which is income-driven repayment plan, the first income-driven repayment plan didn't become available until 2 years after the program was created. Another thing is the type of loan that you have. You have to have direct loans, and this is a point of contention for a lot of student loan borrowers, because direct loans was not widely available prior to 2010. It became available to borrowers on a much wider scale in 2010 as part of the government taking over student lending. So basically what that means is that if you had loans between 2007 and 2010, you may need to double check your loan situation pretty carefully, because you may have a mix of both direct loans and FFEL loans. FFEL loans was the previous student lending program, and before 2010, schools had the choice to opt in to which loan program they wanted to participate in. So that's how come you will hear a lot of borrowers saying that they had FFEL loans. If you have FFEL loans, there is the option to consolidate and ask for direct loans. But if you're starting to do that now, then that starts the payment clock all over again, and that may not be the best solution for you. The next thing is the employment certification form. The employment certification form did not become available until 2012. So that is a contributing factor to a lot of people thinking that, oh yes, I'm on track for public service loan forgiveness. Well, until you submit an employment certification form, Department of Ed does not do a payment count for the qualifying 120 payments until they receive this employment certification form. Um, Initially, when it was rolled out, there was not advice that said that it needed to be submitted annually. I encourage people to submit it annually so that you can avoid the situation of submitting it and then finding out that you're not on the right repayment plan or your payments aren't counting like you thought they would towards public service loan forgiveness participation. And that was definitely a contributing factor towards the program we're going to talk about today. And then lastly, in 2017 is when the application for forgiveness form was created. It was created in October of 2017, and it was not created any sooner because no one was eligible before October of 2017 to apply and successfully qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So Department of Ed waited until the last minute in order to put out this form. So let's talk about what temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness is. So the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program was created out of the 2018 Consolidated Appropriations Act. So basically the budget bill for 2018. It got created because there were so many complaints related to public service loan forgiveness and the numbers of borrowers who were trying to apply and finding out they were not on the right repayment plan. So this temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program was created as a concession, and it created a 700 million fund available on a first come, first served basis for reconsideration for public service loan forgiveness. And the goal was to try to address people who were on the wrong repayment plans because loan servicing companies failed to communicate this requirement to borrowers. And this became a discovery probably around significantly between 2013 and 2015. And it's also a contributing factor to why another income-based repayment plan was created as late as 2015. And so I've included the link at the bottom to Federal Student Aid's page on the program. So the current temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness application process is a lot less structured than it currently is for public service loan forgiveness. So they made the announcement for this in March of 2018. And then they actually started rolling out the process right around the end of May of 2018. So they set up an email address that you send an email to request consideration for temporary expanded PSLF. And then after you submit that email, you will likely get a response back, and it may ask you for up to 10 years worth of employment data or income tax returns, which I actually did do. And so that's how I learned about the IRS Get Transcript tool. I've included a link to that tool there. You are easily able to put in information online and either get 10 years worth of, I should rephrase that, up to 10 years worth of W-2 data and or tax data if they have it. They're only required to keep 7 years on file. And then the next thing you'll have to do is you'll have to submit the application for forgiveness. I've included the link to that form there. And for that form will need to be signed by both you and your employer. Um, the thing that I don't like about the current process is that they have built rejection into this application process. So I encourage people to take 2 copies of the form and get it signed twice by HR. Because part of the requirement is that you have to apply for public service loan forgiveness and be denied and then reapply. Um, and even some members of Congress take issue with the fact that rejection is built into this application process. So, what are the requirements that you have to meet for temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness? I will say, from personal experience, they are being strict about you have to have direct loans. If you don't have direct loans, it may not be worth your time to apply. Or you may have to consider exploring options for how to get onto direct loans. But again, depending upon where you are in the repayment process, that may not be a good fit for you. You'll have to evaluate that self based on your own situation. Um, let's see, you have to have worked 10 or more years for a qualified public service employer. According to Federal Student Aid's website, they say verified and approved by Fed loans. And I'm going to say this for the benefit of people that were not at part one's webinar. Fed Loans is the exclusive loan servicing company as it relates to public service loan forgiveness programs. Um, and so usually it's only a matter of time before your loans are transferred to them for them to become your loan servicer, but there have been reported problems with that process too. As far as the employment verifications, again, usually the best way to have done that is by submitting the employment certification forms. So that is the most reliable way that I advise people to meet that requirement. Another thing is they want you to have made 120 qualifying payments. And qualifying payment counts are a point of contention with both temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness and public service loan forgiveness programs. While they are willing to consider payments that have been made on non-qualifying repayment plans, it seems that there is a newer requirement that the previous 12 payments made prior to applying for TEPSLF have to equal or exceed the payment amount that you would have made on an income-driven repayment plan. I'm not sure when this became a requirement, but it definitely is listed on the page, and so I want to make sure that people are aware of that. When I looked at the most recent statistics that are available as far as approval rates, this is now a factor in the denials. And then, of course, they want you to apply for public service loan forgiveness and have been denied. Additional information that I saw on Federal Student Aid's page is they say you don't have to wait for the denial for regular public service loan forgiveness in order to apply for TEPSLF. Honestly, I'm kind of confused by that advice. And that's not been my experience to date, because I have gotten a rejection letter when I was initially trying to apply for TEPSLF saying that I had not been denied public service loan forgiveness and therefore was ineligible. Um, so I question some of the advice that they have put on their page. So, what can you expect next after you've sent this email saying, I want to be considered for TEPSLF? You will get an email from FedLoans saying that you are being considered for this opportunity. Um, and then they will do an account review. The account review will be done by both FedLoans and federal student aid. And then you're kind of stuck in a waiting pattern. Um, this waiting pattern can range anywhere from a few weeks up to several months. And that is verified by people that are in my Facebook group that have said that it has taken several months, beyond even the time frame that federal student aid lists on their own page. Another thing that I wanted to highlight, and this is something new, I'm not sure how they came up with this requirement, but they are now saying that if additional information is requested, that you have 21 days to submit it to avoid your application for TEPSLF being canceled. Um, I know for me, depending upon what type of data I'm having to request, um, sometimes it does take longer to get it. Um, and again, I'm not clear on when they instituted this 21-day window. I have been encouraging people to simply reapply. So, what are the possible outcomes? The possible outcomes are you get approval and your loans get forgiven under TEPSLF, and yay, celebrate. I actually have known a few people that have gotten forgiveness under both TEPSLF and the regular PSLF program. Um, and people that have successfully gotten forgiveness under TEPSLF have received overpayments refunded to them, beyond the 120. The other thing that I want to make sure to highlight is that any loan forgiveness that you receive under either public service loan forgiveness or temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness is not considered taxable income. This was a huge question for people. And this is part of the incentives for wanting to get your loans forgiven under public service loan forgiveness or temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. There are some other forgiveness tools out there, including, depending upon the type of loan you have, if you reach the benchmark where you've paid 20 to 25 years and you still have a balance and they go to forgive it, that will be considered taxable income for the year in which that forgiveness occurs. So I just want to take a moment to highlight that there. Um, if you get a denial, which is not uncommon, because people are getting denied like 99% of the time so far, um, try to figure out the reason for denial. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I know for me, a big question was regarding qualifying payment counts. I can tell you, based on my own personal experience, that for TEPSLF, they will not give you a qualifying payment count. And they will frame it as this is based on the temporary nature of this program. The only program that you will get a qualifying payment count for is public service loan forgiveness. Um, Try and make any necessary corrections if you are able to figure out and get answers to your questions as to why your application was denied. And I'm encouraging people to reapply. I know for me, I have reapplied twice and been denied. Um, my latest reason for denial is not making enough payments, not making the 120. So let's take a look at the latest loan forgiveness statistics. So since I had the luxury of time on my side over this past week, I decided to try and find the latest statistics. So these are even more up to date than the statistics that were featured in part 1 webinar. So as of December 2019, there have been 1,500 approvals for temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. There is still 645 million available out of the 700 billion, and those funds will remain available until the funds run out. Again, the top reasons for denial for temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness are not being in repayment for 10 years on a direct loan. And so that kind of makes sense because we're in 2020 right now. And remember earlier when I did my timeline, we highlighted that direct loans weren't made widely available to borrowers until 2010. So therefore, I think we're going to start to see the numbers increase for approvals for not only temporary expanded PSLF, but also for public service loan forgiveness, because that big loan type requirement will have been met. Another thing that you're seeing is for denials is qualifying payment counts. I'm not quite sure how Fed Loans does the qualifying payment counts, but pretty much you have to have the right type of loan and on the right type of income repayment plan in order for the payment to count. Otherwise, they're not counting it. And again, this new requirement that they've come up with for payments 1 year prior to your application to be equal to what they would be on an income-based repayment plan. For that, when I looked at the data, that is accounting for 20% of the denials. So what I would like to do is I'm going to advance to the next slide and give you some strategies for navigating a denial when you get it. One thing that I noticed for sure is for temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, because we're talking about repayment plans and their availability, check to see if they are only looking at loan history from your current loan servicer. That may very well be a possibility. If you had previous loan servicers, you may have to reach out to them and request past payment histories. Please note, if you do have to do that, something that I am finding is that banks are only carrying a rolling 7-year payment history. So you may have problems getting history beyond the previous 7 years. If you happen to have proof beyond the 7 years, I'm also encouraging people to make copies of it and scan it into a PDF so that you have an electronic copy of that proof in case you lose your paperwork for whatever reason. Next, consider asking for a public service loan forgiveness qualifying payment count audit. In some instances, That is a successful strategy that people from my Facebook group have reported, although it does take a long time. And you will likely need to submit employment certification forms from all of your past employers from 2007 to present. Lastly, if those options don't work, I've given you 4 different resources for filing complaints um, with regard to your federal student loans. 2 of them involve federal student aid. One is the Ombudsman Group. A second, and I've included links to them as well. Um, a second one is their feedback system. One that I have used in the past is Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Um, you will get a response to any complaint that you file with Consumer Finance Protection Bureau within a fairly reasonable time frame. It may not resolve your issue, but the reason why I continue to recommend them is because any complaint that you file with that agency, they are required to report it to Congress on an annual basis. Um, and so, yes, you become a statistic, but to me, that continues to drive home the concerns and the issues regarding student loans. Um, and then lastly, I recommend trying to reach out to your local US Senator or House of Representatives office. I know for me, this is a strategy that I have had to employ as well on my own personal situation. What are some future changes that you can expect to these programs? One change that is coming for sure is when it comes to income-driven repayment plans and the recertification processes. Um, the Future Act was recently passed in December of 2019, and part of what the Future Act does is it encourages data sharing with IRS, and it will assist with income verifications. And the hope is to assist with and make the process a little faster when it comes to annual recertifications and more accuracy with repayment plan calculations. Um, One of the other things that I want to highlight with this is I'm not sure if some of you heard about this case, but there was a case recently between Congress and the Department of Ed as it related to student loan forgiveness for disabled, for people with disabilities and veterans as well. And the Department of Ed was really insistent on an application had to be submitted in order to grant the forgiveness. And Congress members had passed a legislation to automatically forgive student loans for people with permanent disabilities because there was enough proof across various systems, and that was met with resistance by our current Department of Ed. So their hope with passing the Future Act is that automation of the process will enable automatic forgiveness when it comes to situations such as those, and assist with speeding up for loan forgiveness claims as well. Another thing that you can expect is increased outreach by Department of Ed to borrowers regarding loan forgiveness programs. The awareness of both the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and Temporary Expanded Public Service Loan Forgiveness has been low overall, both among borrowers and even with qualifying employers. And that's part of the reason that drove my advocacy work to try and raise awareness amongst um, HR departments at libraries. But now Department of Ed will have to do increased outreach for that based on recommendations from the Government Accountability Office. And then lastly, there are some proposed changes when it comes to the TEPSLF application process. They are talking about possibly trying to automate that or come up with a single application for both public service loan forgiveness and TEPSLF. So those are some future changes that you can expect to see. Hopefully it will result in a more simplified application process. Um, so this is my own personal opinion. Um, and so I came up with this quote: the current state of student lending is a form of systemic universal economic disenfranchisement. Why do I say that? The reason why I say that is because student lending, as we know it, has evolved into a system over time um, that pretty much signs people up for lack of a better description of debt for life. A lot of people don't understand that student loan debt is the only type of debt that does not have a statute of limitations for collection. And so, pretty much when you take on these student loans, you're committing to a repayment period that spans 10 to 30 years. Um, and that's kind of unreasonable. It gets to a point where, you know, if life happens, it can greatly impact some personal finance choices. And we'll go into that a little bit more in detail in the next slide. So think about when you apply for the FAFSA and you're taking on student loans. Initially, you're talking about a multi-generational impact. Um, as you can see here, I've captioned it between seniors all the way to Gen Y. But when you're applying for your loans, the student is taking on debt, the parent is taking on debt, and then you have a cosigner, or at least at the time in which I took out my loans, I did. So that impacts either multiple households and or multiple generations. That's why I describe it as a problem that has multi-generational impact when you're taking on loans. Um, a lack of disclosure of what you're getting into. A lot of people don't understand that when you're taking out loans, you are taking on a commitment of 10 to 30 years worth of repayment. Um, and it didn't used to be that way. Um, one talking point that I have changed is if you get into financial hardship situation where bankruptcy becomes an option, um, even attorneys used to say that you couldn't, that student loans were not eligible for bankruptcy. There was a recent article from NPR that dispelled that myth, and I'm sure you've heard about the case about, I think it was a naval attorney who was able to get forgiveness through bankruptcy, or at least get it worked with. Um, if that becomes an option for you, there are two specific tests that student loans have to meet for bankruptcy judgments. They have to meet an undue hardship requirement and a Bruner test. According to the NPR article, a lot of people don't even try to get their student loans forgiven during bankruptcy proceedings. And so their advice is to now try, and that it's up to the judge. Um, so you may have to speak to your attorney and ask him about those two requirements. And Of course, that may mean that your bankruptcy proceeding may cost you a little bit more money. Um, but hopefully judges are changing their stance and willing to work with borrowers depending upon what their overall financial situation is. Again, there's no statute of limitations on the collection of student debt. So if you don't repay your student debt and you get into default, um, it impacts your tax returns. You'll no longer get them because they will seize them to satisfy the student loan debt. It will impact Social Security benefits if you still have outstanding student loan debt to where you will not get benefits. And in some states, some state laws may vary, but it may impact issuance of professional licenses, etc. And remember, this is the same program that all of our emergency responders qualify for, police, fire, medical, elder care services, etc. Um, so I know that sounds pretty bleak, but I want you to know that you can do the paperwork to apply for these programs yourself. If anyone asks you for money related to loan forgiveness programs, it is a scam. This paperwork is free and it's available through all of the links that I provided you that are at government websites. Okay. It will take some time. It will take up to a few hours of your time. I kind of reframe it and try to view it as an act of self-care. You Most of us are already working for a qualifying public service employer, so there's no reason not to take advantage of this program that is available. Um, Loan forgiveness approval rates are likely to rise later this year and beyond. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what the forgiveness figures look like in 2021 per se, because I think they are going to increase because now you have all of the requirements in place in order to fully participate in the program. I do want to reassure you that if you are already participating in public service loan forgiveness, that you will unlikely be impacted by any changes to the programs. And one thing we do know for sure is we definitely can anticipate more change in the future. Um, Lastly, I've gotten a lot of questions within my Facebook group that I moderate about um, COVID-19 and the proposed temporary relief proposals as it relates to student loans. The only thing that we know for sure is that based on a press release from Department of Ed and announcements from President Trump, that there is a desire to waive interest on federal student loans for a limited period of time. Um, but there are also competing proposals that have been put out there. I've looked them over and these are what my takeaways are. For the Republican plan, they want to charge no interest for 60 to 90 days. They want to give you options for forbearance and payment suspension. And they also, if you continue to make loan payments during the emergency, they want to apply the payments directly to the principal, lowering the overall amount that you owe. And they want to suspend payments for borrowers that are already late on their accounts during the COVID-19 period. What I do want to say about this is that the average student loan payment is anywhere ranges anywhere between the amount of 200 to 600 per month. And so depending upon where you are in the repayment process, the based on what I've read, the interest rate, the no interest, will not lower your monthly payments. Your monthly payments will still remain the same under the Republican proposal. And it would be less of a savings even if you were to try and break it down by a payment. It would range anywhere from maybe $100 to $300 per month if the Republican plan considered trying to lower payments, but that's not a part of what has been proposed initially. For the Democratic plan, the Democratic plan is proposing making loan payments on borrowers' behalf for the duration of the emergency. The difference here is that the Democratic plan also includes borrowers with FFEL loans. So that may include older types of loans, and the Republican plan doesn't specify that. They also want to make a difference between forbearance, a deferment, and suspension of payments. And the biggest piece is that they are trying for a $10,000 student loan forgiveness per borrower during the national emergency. You may be wondering how they came up with that figure. The way they came up with that 10,000 student loan tax-free student loan forgiveness figure is related to default rates. Most people that have problems repaying their student loans owe a debt of $10,000 or less. And so if they're able to get that through, that actually improves the economic health of a lot of people, and not only enables them, frees up more income for them to pay for necessities that they may need for the poorest people. It gets them spending money on supplies that they would need. So that's how they came up with that figure to help mitigate people that are currently in default. All right. Shall we open it up for questions? Oh,
Yes.
before we open it up for questions, though, I almost forgot to mention, at this time, as you know, over the weekend, they were not able to reach an agreement on the stimulus package. So at this time, I am encouraging people, if you are financially able to and you are participating in public service loan forgiveness programs, to continue to make your payment. If you are not on an income-driven repayment plan, and you think that may be a way to lower your payments, then I encourage you to explore that option as well. Please note that if you opt for a deferment or a forbearance, which are already pre-existing student loan management tools that are available, you're not making payments on your loans for a specified period, and therefore they will not count towards your PSLF payment counts. Other than that, I'm encouraging you to wait to hear for updates from your loan servicer directly, because that means that something has passed and they've actually relayed that information for what that's going to look like and how it's going to impact borrowers. Okay, now we can open it up for questions.
Hi. All right. Thank you so much. That was amazing. And so, to everyone who is on here, we're going to be staying on a little bit more. But if you have to leave for any reason, please know that this is being recorded and is going to be made available after this. And we got a number of really great questions. And so, I'm just going to scroll through back to the top of the list, but this is also your opportunity. If there was a question that was on the tip of your tongue, feel free to enter it into the chat box. And so the first question that is kind of like, what is the best approach for participation? So somebody who said that they wanted to get the best information, and I think that you've provided so much content, you have a lot of links, you have a lot of things. But like when it comes to this, you know, what is the best approach for participating? And then, you know, somebody had said that they had submitted a form and, you know, that they are 30 hours that they submitted their PSLF form,
Mhm.
that they are working 30 hours, but they are in limbo. And the thing is that the PSLF site regard 30 hours as full time, but the library regards 40 hours as full time. What is there anything that you could provide to this person regarding the situation that
Yes,
they're in?
yes. So, for the sake of public service loan forgiveness and temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness, their full-time requirement trumps what the local HR says. I have actually had reports from some participants where their HR refuses to sign off on the employment certification form. Please know that there is an option on the form on the first page um, that you can mark that says that you're not able to get verification from the employer. I would still submit that form anyway. And again, it may be educating your HR. So in part one, I actually included a link from Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They have an employer pledge that spells out what the employer's role is in supporting public service loan forgiveness participation for employees. Um, I kind of market it as a great tool for introverts to start the conversation with their HR. Um, but yes, as long as you are working 30 or more hours per week, then you are eligible to participate in this program. And something else that I want to add to this, and I did mention this in part one, is that particularly in the library world, it's not unusual for us to work for more than one qualifying public service employer. If you are working part-time at two jobs and your cumulative hours every week average 30 or more, you are eligible to participate in this program. It just means that you have to submit more than one employment certification form.
Great. Thank you for that. So the next question that was asked, do I can't talk today. Sorry. Consolidated loans count towards loan forgiveness, even if some of those loans consolidated were not direct?
Yes, they should, as long as they were consolidated into a direct loan. Um, they have to have been consolidated into a direct loan. Um, if they were not consolidated into a direct loan, you would have to do another loan consolidation to consolidate what you likely have are FFEL loans into a direct loan. But again, it depends on where you are in the repayment process. If you honestly, if you have more than 7 years in repaying on an FFEL loan, it may not be worth it for you to start all over and do a consolidation, because what happens when you do a consolidation with direct loans, any of those previous payments that you made, they don't count. They only start from the time of the consolidation with direct loans. So I'll give you a good example. In my own personal situation, I had graduated from college in 2007, and I had done loan consolidations. Well, I still had FFEL loans. I did not consolidate until 2010. So they are only counting my payments as qualifying for from the time in which I had the direct loan. So they're only counting from 2010 forward. And unfortunately, at this time, there doesn't seem to be any bills that are pending in Congress to try and address people that had FFEL loans that may work in public service. Hopefully that answered your question.
It sure sounds like it. If not, I did put into the chat box where they can follow up with you afterwards. So the next question is somebody had asked was, can we skip the PSLF and apply directly to the temporary PSLF?
I suppose, well, no, because you still have to do the PSLF application for forgiveness. So, I mean, you're still going to have to do the paperwork steps that are involved for public service loan forgiveness, because again, they're going to look at your account and have to figure out how many qualifying payments you had and on what basis they're able to approve or deny based on the legislative requirements of the programs. So you still have to submit the employment certification form, and you're still going to have to do the application for forgiveness.
Okay. All right, thank you. There was somebody who mentioned that they are a bilingual Spanish library assistant, and they are wanted to share this information with Latino families in their community. Are content like this available in different languages?
For webinar content, unfortunately, no. I do know that I believe Federal Student Aid has the forms available in Spanish. That may be the only other language that that the forms required for program participation are available in. I don't recall seeing them available in any other languages.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next question was that, does it have to be 120 consecutive payments?
The payments don't have to be consecutive. However, they do have to be 120 or more. And you have to be currently working at the time that you apply for forgiveness and your loans are forgiven. So I had touched on this in part one. Don't think you can get happy and be like, okay, I made my 120th payment. Let me hurry up and give notice and quit my job. No, 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 no. Do not do that. Do not do that until after you get some sort of letter in hand that says that your loans have been forgiven. Hopefully, that will not be what you choose to do. Hopefully, you love your work in public service enough, but I can understand for some people that are getting close to retirement that, that may be an option. So,
Thank you. Um, Someone asked, if your application is canceled, are you eligible to reapply?
yes, you are eligible to reapply, and I strongly encourage people to reapply. I personally have reapplied at least twice, and I know I have another reapplication in my future because I keep getting denied.
Okay. Thank you. What information should folks include when sending an email request for consideration for the temporary PSLF?
If you check the link that I included to Federal Student Aid's page, they actually have a general email template on there. But pretty much it's as basic as your name. I think possibly your loan account number, if you happen to have that, or your social security number, and saying, I want to be considered for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Does it have to be one employer, current employer, or past employers can be included in the 10 years?
It can include all of those. So, for instance, I've only had 2 employers over the past 15 years. So I'm pretty lucky that I don't have to get paperwork from a lot of people. But I just switched to a new job. So what I did before I left the previous job was I got them to sign off on one last employment certification form. But now that I have that on file, I won't have to continually ask them to complete that paperwork. I'll just have to ask my current employer going forward.
Okay, that is good to know. So somebody asked, what are the top reasons applicants are denied? Are those easily remedied by the applicant in order to reapply?
The top reasons for denial currently, and I think I covered that in one of the earlier slides, are not not being in repayment long enough on a direct loan. So you have to have been in repayment on a direct loan for 10 years. The second reason is not enough qualifying payments. So your payment, your payment number is less than the required 120, which equals 10 years if you did it all consecutively. That's how come I kind of frame the answer as 120 or more. And then the third reason is for the 12 payments prior to your application not matching what you would have paid, the amount you would have paid if you were on an income-based repayment plan. That one, the easiest way I can think of to try and remedy that is either to consider applying and getting onto an income-based repayment plan, which I want to say somewhere in the ballpark of 70+% of borrowers are on income-based repayment plans that are participating in these programs. Or you could use the loan simulator. And I had touched on this in part 1 of the webinar. There is on Federal Student Aid's website, when you log in, and you have to log in order to be able to access this tool, they had a tool that was called Repayment Estimator. They've now changed the name recently to Loan Simulator. And so basically what that allows you to do is it allows you to plug in your outstanding student loans and model the different types of repayment plans that are available and what your monthly payment plan may look like. And so I encourage people to use that tool on Federal Student Aid's website to get an idea of what sorts of student loan payments they may be looking at and see if there may be a better one that fits your situation. So the other thing that I do also want to mention is sometimes your loan servicer may have their own version of this tool. If your loan servicer has a version of this tool and you run their tool and compare it against Federal Student Aid's tool, if you find that there is some sort of discrepancy, I highly encourage you to push back on your loan servicer and ask them to honor whatever figures are offered by federal student aid.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next question, and so we're going to try to wrap it up within the next 10 to 15 minutes, because I do honor everyone's time here, and this has been a really great discussion. So does the PSLF include private loans? If not, is there any relief for public service workers with private loans?
Public service loan forgiveness and temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness only address federal student loans. There is not currently any sort of relief for anyone with private student loans, unfortunately.
Which, as you said, is very, very unfortunate. Maybe that is something that others can, you know, bring up to the forefront, or maybe start working on. Um, is there any plan to expand PSLF forgiveness to include FFEL loans?
Not as far as I know.
Okay. Um, and the last question that came in the chat box a few minutes ago was, what hurdles can someone expect if they're still in school, but working in a public service job and currently only paying the interest?
So if you are currently in school, you are not required to start repaying on your loans until after you graduate. Typically, it's 6 months after you graduate. Um, Generally, for people that are still in school, temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness is not the option for you. You would go through the regular public service loan forgiveness program option. And so you'll have a 6-month grace after graduation, and then uh, you'll get assigned a loan servicer. And I encourage people at that time to make sure that they are choosing an income-based repayment plan, so that they are on a qualifying repayment plan to participate.
Gotcha. That is it. Is there any more questions, comments, concerns before we wrap this up?
I have a comment. I just want to thank you guys all so much for choosing to attend our webinar today. Um, it's been a welcome distraction from COVID-19 coverage. And I just want to thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Yes, thank you. I have added in the chat box the group, the Facebook group. So if you are on Facebook, feel free to go and join this group. And lastly, I will I will share my screen with you all so that I can finish out this presentation. Um, so, oh, share. Current slide. So thank you all for attending this webinar. We are super, super grateful. If you guys have any questions, feel free to use the email that is there, was also in the chat box from before. And if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, have any ideas for any other webinars, feel free to contact the Professional Development Committee here, and stay tuned for any upcoming professional development digest. We just appreciate you so much for doing this for us here today. Is there any more, any last questions, comments, concerns?
Stay well, everyone.
Yes, stay safe, stay well, and thank you so much, Kyra, for doing this wonderful, wonderful webinar for us. It's been a wonderful labor of love, and I hope you all take this information and make you guys' future a little bit brighter and paying a little less money on your student loans. So thank you all and have a wonderful day. Bye.